So today I'm going to show you guys how to make complex images like you can see on the screen right here. This saw handle I made in Tinkercad with a little bit of help from a vector program. I actually used Illustrator, but I'm going to show you how to do it in a free program called Inkscape. Inkscape you can get from inkscape.org. Right here you can download it for Windows, Mac OS, or Linux if you're into that. Now the main thing with Inkscape is you have to have the image to basically model it off of. Now the hardest part of that is getting it. In my situation, the thing that I was using had broken into quite a few different pieces. So I have these wonderful 4 pieces. Having the piece actually does help you a ton. All I did was take these pieces right here, I glued them together, I threw them on my flatbed scanner, and then once I scanned it in, I brought it in Inkscape. Mainly what I had to do here in Inkscape was save it as or in my program, I used HP Smart from my HP printer, but I brought it in as a PDF. Now PDFs are pretty easy to bring in. You can do it as JPEGs, anything you want, but I prefer doing that. When you do it, you can actually change some attributes, things like that. No big deal. I also put in my digital caliper here just to kind of give me a reference point. Further away from the glass, the more fogged out it is. Now this is probably the worst situation. I'm doing a black object without anything behind it because of the height. I couldn't actually put the scanner bed on top of it. So you still get quite a bit of good detail out of it. You can see where the circles are at. You can see where everything's at. I use this tool right here. This draws curves and straight lines. What I like to do is start at one end, kind of go over here. Now if you look at the bottom, this tells you the angle, so you want to make sure you're like trying to be somewhat straight. Everything in here is probably not going to be perfect. I also have my mouse turned up quite a bit, so I'm going to knock that down a little and make it a little bit more precise for me. Again, it's a little tedious if you want to be perfect. Really doesn't matter at the end of the day. I use my scroll wheel to scroll up and bring it over. Now the fun part of this is the curves. So I have this curve right here. This looks to be about the other end of that straight line. Now if you click and then you hold, what it'll do is you can move that curve around and you can make that curve. What I like to do is make sure that this long line is actually pointed in the direction so that it's a nice curve into a straight line. And then you can bring that up and bring it over to here. I'm not too concerned about the straightness of this line. And a really nice thing is you can drag this over and bring it in. Now we have all these beautiful complex angles here. You could be meticulous. You could try to make these each one of these 45. I'm just gonna bring it in where it looks close because I'm wanting not to bore you guys to death when I do this whole thing, and bring it around. Now I'm just gonna bring it up to the top because this actually has a little safety feature if you want to use it on my saw, but I at the end chose not to utilize it. Now as far as the walls go, you're gonna kind of eye these things. Obviously making these about the exact same width is probably going to be another tedious, meticulous process. It doesn't take long to really just get it in there and get it close enough. The thickness of your walls, depending on what you're using it for, this is outside, so I used PETG to make sure that everything was set in there in a way that wouldn't melt in my garage, being an outside tool. Again, these also don't have to be perfect, so you can come back and fix a lot of these. We can see we have our little curve here. Again, we're going to click and hold. We're going to shape that curve to where it matches up as good as we want it to. Again, bringing that bottom line down. And then we'll bring it all the way down here. Don't really care about that bottom curve, but I do care about the bottom. Now the nice thing about this is that it'll snap together. So now when we hold down Control and we move our mouse wheel, we will see that we have this whole section right here that has been drawn up. If you feel like you need to finagle some of these things, click on this tool right here. This one is Edit Pass by Nodes. I prefer the corner one. That'll kind of help you reshape some of these corner ones if you feel like they're a little bit off. So for example, this one doesn't feel right, or you want to make it shaped differently, it'll let you go in and play with it a little bit, reshape that. It'll even let you move these around. So if you're like, oh man, these walls are way too thick, or I made one really thin, or I didn't get it up where I need it to be, you can always come in and shape these up however you want. If you have one that didn't have a curve in it, you can actually change this by clicking somewhere in the middle of it, and you can bring a curve out. So if you wanted it curved after the fact, you can go in there and change it by just clicking in the middle, dragging that curve out, and now we have a nice little curve. Just for time perspective, I've gone through already and mapped all these out, so we're gonna go ahead and hide this, and I will show you guys what the pieces are that I've made. So end of the day, I made one that is all these different screw paths. So that's every single one of these. I used a circle tool. Circle tool is pretty cool. You can do it like that, or if you hold shift, it'll do it from the center, or if you hold alt, it'll just kind of go with it. Control will make it actually is the one key you're going to use the most. This is the one to keep it a perfect circle. Again, that's how I mapped it out on every single one of these. So if you go into every single one of these holes here, all I did was go to the corner, hold down Control, drag it across. You can see that circle is very concentric, and that's how I made that circle. Not too hard to do. We're going to go ahead and hide that, bring all these screw holes out. So what you'll want to do next is bring all these and save them into a file. This one particularly was for a cutout. This one is to do the walls here on the outside. This one's to do the walls on the inside. Now I will tell you, if you go all the way around and you make the walls touch, you're going to have a little bit of a problem because it's going to cut it out. So what I did instead when I made this thing is I went to one side and I brought them to where they were still apart. And then after I was done outlining the whole thing, I brought them back together so that it's not a solid object, and then all my walls were basically the same width and everything like that. Again, if you feel like your walls are a little bit too thin, always be able to drag them and make them bigger. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hide all my screw paths, and I labeled these. These not really hard to label. We can label that one test, anything you want. The inner cutout, the inner, and then the outer. So first thing I want to do is take the outer and I want to save it as an SVG. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go on my desktop, I'm going to make a new folder called handle, and we're going to name this the inner, or the outer, sorry. Once you name that one outer, we're going to hide that. Oh, and again, you don't want this piece too. So we're going to go ahead and fix that real quick. Always hide your base layer. It will import it. So now we got the outer done. Now we're going to bring the next one in. File, save as, inner wall. And then we're going to bring our cutout. And then we're going to bring our screws in. Now you may want to, being whatever case you want, join some of these together. You could have the screws and the outer piece together just so you know they're in exact right spots. It's really personal preference. And again, you can do a lot of these measurements when you're done at the end. So I'm going to name that one screws. And now we have all our SVG files. So now we're going to go back into here, cancel that. We're going to create a new design. Now this is where things get a little tricky. This is my workspace. This is exactly how big my print bed is. The thing we're designing is way bigger than that. I had a lot of fun chopping it up and making it fit. And we're going to go ahead and go to my handle folder. And first thing we're going to do is bring in my outer. Now you'll want to focus on the art, and then you'll notice that the width is pretty big and the length is actually bigger than what Tinkercad's limit. Now this is because of how I imported it. My PDF was actually way too big. So what we're going to do is get ourselves a correct scale. So I'll show you real quick here how I did that. What I did is I went and grabbed the biggest, widest part of my device, which is the handle. I then took my digital calipers and brought them across. Now, this is roughly 154, 155. We're going to go with a rough estimate of 155 because everything usually is about accurate all the time. So we know that's 155 across. So what we're going to do, and we have to do this with every single thing that we bring in, is we have to scale these things down. So we're going to try 26, see what we're at, 154.65. Pretty good guess, because I've done this a few times. There's 155.83, so we're going to try 0.08. Pretty close, 0.07. And now for 0.06, now we see we have our exact measurement of 155. I'm going to go ahead and copy this because we're going to do this several times and it'll be fine. So we're going to go ahead and click import. Now once you see this full thing import, you're going to have a few other pieces you'll want to import. Again, I might as well just go ahead and do it. So that was the outer. Let's bring the inner in, paste that in, import that, choose a file, sure, why not, import. So we have outer, inner screws and one other piece to import. Choose a file, the cutout, and you can see that one's completely solid. Now there's a few other tricks you can do here, one of which is I can take this piece. We'll go ahead and move that up, and we'll also rotate. And I love it when it doesn't show you what. Make sure you type it in, because most of the time these things are not right. And we can see this one was not scaled correctly for whatever reason. But that's okay, because we know how to scale this back. Actually, that is flipped for some reason. So we'll go ahead and flip that 180. All right, so now we have all our different pieces. The first part of this is I need to duplicate this one. This is because we have a different fill mode, which we're going to use, which is called silhouette. Now, if, again, one of the big things you want to do is have your digital calipers. You want to measure a few things on this. So we have the thickness of this, which says it's in inches. We hate inches. So it says it's about 3 millimeters thick. So this bottom piece, what we'll do is we'll go in here, click it down to 3. This is our bottom piece. This next one will also come in and do this, and we can see that we are a little bit over 18, so 19 millimeters thick. That's a really good way of bringing that in. So we got our two pieces. Again, this one is now down to 3. Bring this one up to 19. So now we have two big pieces, and you can just kind of eye them up. I find that the grid gets a little bit off, but it's not too terribly bad. But you can line these up pretty easily just from looking at it, making sure everything fits in correctly. Now the rest of this, one of them being the handle, and this one was the one that was actually rotated incorrectly, so we're going to do that at 180. That'll come in here. We know that this also is going to be 19 millimeters tall, and this one will just rotate again back to 180. We'll bring it in, turn it into a hole, and we'll scale it in to where it fits. So once you have it in where you think it should be, bump it over, make sure the walls all line up. We're going to do a teeny tiny adjustment where it just kisses the walls. There we go. And back on the other side too. Had I brought it in correctly, you wouldn't have to do too much of this finagling, but it is what it is. And then the last piece is bring in all your different holes. Now, what I like to do is measure everything, kind of figure out the distances from the edge or from the top or whatever. That'll help you bring in all the edges. Again, these are all going to be 19 millimeters tall because we're going to want them to touch the other edge. Now, if you're wanting to do fancier things with these, per se, like say you want to put in a center hole on it and you want to mirror the other side, do the same thing. You can easily drag these through, bring them up. I would say in this case, we're going to resize you down to about 4. And we're going to drag it up. Since that's 19, we'll bring it 17. So we're going to have a 2 millimeter drop in these things. And generally when you make these things, you want to make sure they're all even. So we're going to bring that in. We'll say 12 by 12 looks pretty good. And in the height, we want that to be 4. So then we have a reverse. And the hardest part of this is eyeing it in to where it's in the center. Now, if this was a bump or a hole, you would just make it a hole, and then once you're done, this would have a 2 millimeter drop in the bottom. We would then take these and flip them over. So if you're wanting to make the reverse side of this whole thing, you just copy it, reverse it, move it over here, and you'll see now why I did a 180. And the best part of this is I can deselect, grab that bottom piece, drop it all the way down to the ground, and you can even find that little piece that was mirrored over here underneath. If you can't, you can just drag that up real quick. Bring this up again to 17. And then you can take these and drop them back down. So click U. On these kind of things, because tolerances are very tight when you do something like that, you'd actually want to drag this down to probably an 11 or even a 10, and then find that center spot. Ideally, you'd have a screw hole through this as well. but looking at it, I'm well within some tolerances, making this one a solid. So now this would flip over and it would fit inside that. You can button up your tolerances if you want. You can drag them down, whatever you feel more comfortable with. And then this last piece, of course, we're going to bring it back down to 0. And then join it all as a shape. And so now, between these two, we have a bump. We have another bump that bumps in. We have our holes. We have our different sizes of our handles. And essentially you're good for a test print once you make all your necessary holes and everything else like that, or any other cutouts. I know mine had a bunch of cutouts where I put bricks in here, brought them up, measured the distances of them. I think some of them were like 24, and I knew it was butted up against that wall, so it made it a little easier, and I knew how high it came off of it, everything like that. And that's essentially how you make really complex, even with smooth edges, shapes in Tinkercad.